Dan Perry here with another C++ tutorial for Dan on Tech. In this video we will look at if statements. Now, if statements are the simplest of our decision structures, our ability to ask a question and branch or do different tasks depending on the answer. And in the if statement, we come in and we ask our question. We have our if. And if it is true, we branch off and execute a sequence of instructions. If it's false, we just jump down or skip those instructions and then begin executing those instructions after the end of the if structure. Now, for the if statements, or for example, or the way we do if statements, is we'll use the if command. Now, let me create a variable. Let me just create an integer. Let's make it x, and let me set it equal to 3. And for the if statements, the syntax is if, and then in parentheses, you put your question. You ask your question. So I'm going to say if x equal 3, and notice I use the double equals. Remember, the single equals is the assignment operator. It says assign the value to. Double equals tests equality, so by saying x equal 3, what we're saying is if x is equal to the number 3, then we do what happens in the code block after the if. And a little way when I'm writing code that I keep from forgetting open and close parentheses and open and close curly brackets is if I'm writing, I'll typically do an open close and then move my cursor back between the two and hit enter a couple of times. And by doing that, I don't forget to close those curly brackets. I did the same thing when I typed the if statement. I did an if open close parentheses, then came back in to put what was in there. One of the most common errors we have especially when we're editing, is we don't have the same number of open and close parentheses. Notice also when I'm in that structure, I've indented. Remember, C and C++, they don't care about white space, but we as programmers can use that white space to help us see what's going on, to see those structures, to know what's happening in it. So I'll say here just a simple out, or simple C out, and in quotes I'll just say equal. And if I had other things I wanted to do, I could have as many statements in here as I wanted. For the first example, we're just going to have that simple equal. And so when I run this, it's going to build it, and it just says the word equal. Now, what happened in this case was the program came through, it created that variable x and gave it a value of 3. Then it came here and it tested in what was in the parentheses. It checked and said, is x equal to 3? That was true in this case. Since that was true, it jumped into this code block and it executed the commands there. In our case, there was only the single command equal, so it said equal. And then it jumped out of the code block, and had there been something down below it, it would have executed that next. Well, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to make x equal to 4. And if I run it this time, I just get to press any key. Well, let me go in here and put in a cout that's after that code block and just say after if. Now, you'd never do this in a real program, but this will help us to illustrate what's actually happening. And so this time when I compile it and run it, it says after if. So here it came down. It set x equal to 4. It checked and said, is x equal to 3? And the answer was no, that was a false. So it jumped and skipped to after that closed curly brackets and began executing the code after that, which was the cout and then the return. So if it's false, it goes and jumps and executes after the code block. Well, I'm going to make one more change here. I want to change that to greater than or equal, and I better change my message here to greater or equal. Now when I run it, I got build errors. And I got the build errors because it's greater than or equal. I have to put the greater than before the equal sign. And this time when I run it, it says greater, actually says of. I mistyped of as or as well. But it comes in, it sets x equal to 4. It compares x to 4, is that greater than or equal to? And it is. So it comes in, executes the code block, and then continues after the code block. Let's do one more. And I'm going to change x back to 3. Now, since this says greater than or equal, it should, once again, execute the greater, and I should have probably changed that instead of to or, greater of equal. And so once again, it comes down, it sets x equal to 3, says is x greater than or equal to 3, and the answer there is yes. So since that's true, it executes the ifs code block and then continues after the code block. So that's the basic if statement, and it's a very powerful way of asking questions and branching and doing different things based on the results of those. You would not in general have very many ifs that had only a single line of code inside the if statement. And in fact, since this has only a single line of code, I actually can run it without those curly brackets and it will still run correctly. But if I had more than one command I needed to run inside that if statement, then I would have to have the curly brackets so it knows the beginning and ending of the code block. Now, although you can do that, I highly recommend that even if it's a single statement, that you always put it inside of a code block, because you never know if sometime down the road when you have to make changes to this program that you may have to add additional lines of code. If you didn't put the curly braces, you may spend a little time debugging trying to figure out what's going wrong with it. So I highly recommend always putting that code block in. Well, thank you for watching this Dan on Tech video. Please subscribe to this playlist so you don't miss future videos, and please check out and subscribe to our other Dan on Tech playlists.